I'm Julia Poliner,
I'm
and
Elliot.
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm Elliot Bailey.
I'm Justin Schwartz.
I'm Jocelyn Pressley.
Today we're going to be talking about the movies Pierrot and In the Mood for Love, and we're going to be talking about their similarities and contrasting them a little bit and their cultural significances. So, yeah. Um, so I focused on the um distance between camera and the scene within Pierre Le Fou and In the Mood for Love. And Pierre Le Fou is, for the most part, set outside, honestly, and in these big wide shots where you get to see both characters. One thing that I noted that we talked about in class a little bit was the positions that Ferdinand and what's her name, Marianne, are positioned in, and how usually Ferdinand is above Marianne. But actually, at the end, I noticed just when rewatching, Marianne kind of stands over Ferdinand at the end in the shots, and I just thought that that was interesting as he thinks that he has this control over her, and he's like really falling in love with her. But towards the end, we see that she's actually manipulated this whole time, and this whole time she's had the power over him.
Yeah, kind of like a femme fatale from like
Mhm.
film noir, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Ferdinand becomes engulfed in Marianne's life, like completely throughout the whole film, ever since he runs off from his wife. Like Marianne's life is what he becomes engulfed in, it rules over him. So like that definitely is a thing with the film.
Yes.
yeah,
By the end, when he finally realizes that, he realizes how much power that she has over him, and it reflects it with the camera angles.
yeah. I remember we talked about this one scene in class where I think it's where they're first starting to talk, and Ferdinand like walks over to this painting, and
Mhm.
then it pans down to Marianne, and I feel like it's I pointed this out in class, but it's her head is positioned like adjacent to his crotch a little bit. And I feel like, Julia, what you were talking about, the framing and the blocking of these characters are really intentional to show like the power dynamics, just like the way that Ferdinand views Marianne as a woman. I feel like it's very like you can feel his gaze on her a lot of the time, and the ending kind of reverts that, like how you're talking about. It's kind of her. It's kind of like she's putting the male gaze on him, and you know, I don't know, everything falls out after that.
Mhm.
I feel like that's interesting.
Yeah. It's like a totally, and I know that you're gonna get to this, but it's a totally sexual film without having any sex within it.
Yeah,
Just in like the way that these shots are angled with what you were saying, and just like any of the scenes where like you'll see like part of a hand or something where you're like what just happened? Or the cuts of scenes, which I know Elliot is going to talk about a little bit too. But yeah, it's very strategic and very interesting. Um,
yeah,
and kind of to contrast that, In the Mood for Love, they basically do, well, they do like the same thing, but at the same time, it's very much the opposite, where they imply a lot of sex and we don't see it. But the camera shots are now very confined. And compared to Pierre Le Fou, which at the time was happening at this great art revolution during France, where it was a lot about like freedom of expression and freedom of art and freedom of sex and whatever. In China, there's a big push towards working and everybody like kind of doing their part in the community, which is a big focus of the movie, where like all the time you see people talking about, oh, I have to go to work. You see, I'm not thinking of her name right now, but the woman at work a whole bunch.
Yeah, I mean, both feel, I don't know, both films I thought were very similar in a way, even though,
Mhm.
like you said, Pierrot Le Fou is like so open and free, even with how it is shot, like, and In the Mood for Love is very closed off and reserved with how it's shot. They still feel very similar. It's about this like relationship between these two characters and how it can be like explosive in a way. It's a lot smaller in the Mood for Love, but it's still like a very passionate thing, and it kind of ruins their lives in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like in the mood for love, they have very like despite the time they spend together, they still have very separate lives. Whereas in Pierrot Le Fou, once they conjoin as people, like it's almost like their life together is one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So like that's
Immediately. Oh, sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
I was gonna add on to that. Like immediately after Marianne's dead, like Ferdinand wastes no time wrapping that explosive around his head. So it's like you're so right that they're the differences between the movies that like In the Mood for Love is they're connected, but they're almost so separate that they can't be connected.
Mhm.
And Pierre LeFou is like they're so conjoined that they actually it's such an artificial conjoinment that they can't actually be together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a good like
You brought
barrier between the two films.
the ending of Pierrot Le Fou, and the endings are so they're like kind of similar in that
Mm,
they're like a release of these memories, but these releases are very different. Like
yeah,
Pierrot Le Fou, he's basically erasing these memories he had of this romance. But in the mood for love, Moana's immortalizing these memories by by uh what's the word? Uh you know, like what you
talking,
no like to the
speaking,
yes, but um con
Confining?
conversing.
I'm completely blanking on the word. I'm so
Is it
sorry.
confining?
Like yeah, kind of like confessing, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
confessing
confessing.
these yeah, my bad.
No,
Confessing
it's all good.
dreams, and in that way kind of immortalizing them rather and reminiscing on them rather than Ferdinand who just blows himself up and erases these memories,
mhm.
you
Yeah,
know?
It's very much like Pierre Le Fou almost takes like a fantasy approach to this whole relationship versus where In the Mood for Love took a much more realistic sense where like Pierre Le Fou, they run off and all of a sudden, oh my goodness, they're in love. It's this explosive thing, but it all comes crashing all at once. Whereas In the Mood for Love, it's this like it's it's still very explosive, like we said, but it's this very subtle love at the same time. And it doesn't end just straight out. It's kind of preserved forever in his memory.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like it really the two films couldn't be more um separate, but also so similar. I mean, like it's really two love stories, but from two different cultural backgrounds. And you see in those movies, and I know Elliot, you talk about this, how their culture kind of defines how they react to each other and their experiences in a relationship. And it's such an interesting case study to look at a movie from France and to look at a movie from China and see how it's what could basically be seen as boil it down to a love story and see how it's differently portrayed in these two different cultures in these two different time periods that were going through major like revolutions and cultural upheaval. It's really very like interesting to see. the two movies interact with each other is crazy. My timer went off, so and we can cut this part. But Elliot, do you want to get into
Okay.
your stuff?
So yeah, so basically, I'm gonna talk about how the editing within the films kind of convey a little bit about what Julia was talking about and the different kind of portrayals of love that we get through these two movies through their stylistic differences. So in France at the time in the 60s, sexual freedom was like, it was the big thing. There was a lot, liberation was a major aspect of the French culture at the time. Whereas in the Mood for Love, in the 50s, I think 1950, there was a law that was passed that marriages no longer have to be arranged. So they were still kind of in that mindset of not exactly expressing love for the sake of it, but almost like marriage as a like a contractual kind of thing. But within the films, we kind of this isn't exactly what the films convey. Like it is, but we get different reactions to it. Like in Pierrot Le Fou, it's almost like Ferdinand and Marianne are taking advantage of these liberties that they have by indulging in these self-destructive behaviors that we see, and the impulsivity of it all, and that we really see and can be conveyed in the editing. Like often a word that I've heard used a lot so far is explosive, and there are like literal explosives going off multiple times in the film that kind of add this sense of chaos in their expressions of themselves and in their romance. Whereas in the Mood for Love, they aren't taking advantage of anything. They're Mowan is reminiscing to the smallest detail of everything that that he remembers of his time in this romance. Like those scenes of Li Zhen getting noodles, how it cut back multiple times to different like shots of her walking up the stairs and walking down the stairs. One shot had him walking past her down the stairs and saying hello. One shot had him walking down the stairs and he didn't say hello. So we really see like this aspect of memory and like almost trying to get things right in your head, but through that we see how the details in this relationship are really stressed and he's paying attention, but we don't see that in Pierrot Le Fou. Everything's on a whim. It's all impulsive. It's all explosive and whatnot. And we see that through the editing in, like, for example, the random shots to fireworks. In the first, I think it's like in the first 30 minutes of the film, there's like a random fireworks, and then he makes a plane with his hands and there's like fire it's like this very random, explosive, impulsive shooting that conveys these ideas as well. And like they're taking advantage of the freedom that they have, or anything. I mean, I could reference a couple more scenes.
We got about 5 minutes left. on this
Okay.
one. We can cut that air, by the way.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, it really just like when they're stealing cars and stealing boats, and then it cuts to like the flashing neon lights of life in French V8. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but um it just cuts to life, and it's like Godard is seeing these impulsive kind of self-destructive decisions and then impulsively cutting to something that in essence describes what is going on in a broader sense, you know, like he's describing life as this impulsive random, um you know, there's infinite possibility within life, and we see that through both films but differently.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of like the infinite possibilities of life and how, because both films do that, like you said. And it's really cool to see how they do it differently and how it takes on such a different approach in each one. Because obviously, like, I don't know, we keep saying like explosive and um like talking about how Pierre LeFou is very like random and chancy, which it is, but like even in the randomness of their actions, there's still order. Like by the end, like we see that like Marianne is very in control and you know, she wants spontaneity, but her spontaneity still has order to it. Like it's still very controlled. And both films have like a sense of control and like I don't know, it's cool how they portray the same thing in such different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And like kind of like the scenes I was talking about earlier, like the noodles, how
Hmm.
you see them differently each time, even if it is like the same instance, the same night. Like we see a lot of scenes where she changes dresses, and that, you know, denotes that it's a different time. But even in the scenes that she's wearing the same clothing, and we see different things happen, it is playing with that idea of like infinite possibility, and like and how that relates to someone's memory. And like if you're remembering something, it could be remembered an infinite amount of ways. It's just how like how how you do it. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly, but you see what I'm kind of getting at.
I feel like an interesting like interpretation off of that is that the two movies are kind of showcasing two different like Pierre LeFou is showcasing like young love, and In the Mood for Love is showcasing like middle-aged, more realistic love. Where like Pierre LeFou shows, like you were talking about, its editing is so impulsive that it mirrors like how people feel when they're like 20 and they're in love. It's like I want to go do this, I want to go do that. And In the Mood for Love, like you said, it takes its time with the characters, and it really embellishes the memory aspect of it, because in relationships later into your life, the thing you cherish the most is like a memory. And I feel like the editing styles of both kind of reflect the the life that the lifetime that the characters are in. I know that Wong Kar Wai was like the same character as the characters he wrote in this movie, because he wanted to kind of tell the story of what's going on in his love life through this movie. And I feel like that's very interesting.
Yeah,
So
totally.
Josh, do you want to move into your
Yeah.
section?
kind of like what Elliot was saying. I focused on collage and like editing in that sense. We talked about that in class with Pierrot Le Fou, but I think In the Mood for Love also would classify as a collage film. Um, I feel like a lot of scenes are just very like they feel like a scrapbook, like again tying in with memory and how things are remembered. Like In the Mood for Love, it just feels like we're looking back, like on how things were remembered by Moan or Lijian, either of them. But there's this scene that we talked about where they're sitting in a restaurant and Lijian's dress changes a bunch of times because it's multiple days where they're doing the same thing. It's like all of that it feels like the same day, even though it was multiple days. And there's so many moments where, like, we talk about parataxis with collage and how, everything on screen has meaning and is important. I feel like that's like the epitome of In the Mood for Love, that everything has meaning on screen, like the colors, the mise en scène, all of it has meaning, and like every inch of the screen could be picked apart for meaning and how the love is portrayed between the characters and how they're remembered. And that's, also in Pierrot Le Fou, like it's memory. It's like looking back more than it is looking forward.
No, and like in the mood for love, there's so much visual storytelling that like you can miss it on the first go around. Like I had no idea that she changed dresses in that one scene
Yeah.
when they're getting dinner, and it's like little cues like that adds so much to the story. And it being a collage, like you're experiencing the visual storytelling, the conceptual storytelling, and it's such a good experience that I don't know, it all homogenizes into the film in a way that makes you like think about films differently. And I thought that was like very eye opening, you know, having seen the film.
Yeah, I've seen it 2 or 3 times now, and every time I've seen that movie, I've noticed more. And I
Yeah.
rewatched Pierre Le Fou recently before
Mm.
this, and I feel like I noticed so much more. Like there's just little details all throughout the film that
Yeah.
are just like so glossed over, but like so important. Um, in Pierre Le Fou, like the scene that we wrote about for our discussion post was that one towards the beginning with all the like different rooms with colors. And I like even just like rewatching that scene, there's so much in it that
Yeah.
like can be picked apart. There's like meaning in every single one of those shots, and
Yeah.
it's the same in The Mood for Love. And it's I don't know. I know, Justin, you kind of talk about sex and romance, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like collage is a good way to like depict romance because it's very like memory based. It's very based around how you see
Yeah.
yourself, how you see the other person, how you see the past.
Mhm. I kind of saw that too when rewatching both movies. How in Pure Le Fou, I noticed in one scene, one of them is wearing vertical stripes and the other one is wearing horizontal. And it just made me realize like how important the clothing choices in both movies are, with how it contrasts the relationship in Pierre Le Fou more, and how they're two opposing, conflicting relationships trying to like form to be together. Whereas in The Mood for Love, it's her clothing pieces that change all the time, and how that conflicts with her memory more, or with his memory more than the actual relationship itself necessarily.
Yeah, I'd say with the clothing and in The Mood for Love as well. In the article we read, it talks about her clothing and how I don't know, it's in some ways it's very sexual, like she's wearing these ornate dresses throughout the entire film, and but along with it, like she's so covered still, she's still so reserved, and like she'll be wearing like bright, colorful dresses, but she's covered, she's still hiding away, and like it's still conforming to the society that she's a part of.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I feel like it's a good transition into like I had a couple things about how Pierre LeFou kind of treats women and how, we talked about the male gaze before. And I have this quote from it's an author. Her name is Catherine Benholm from the New York Times. It's a article titled "A Change in French Sexual Views," and so it says it's a slippery slope, said Michel Perrault, a gender historian and author. In France, we've never completely shed the pre-revolution tradition of gallantry that puts women in a subordinate role and ultimately turns them into sex objects. In the 60s, women wanted to be liberated of all the taboos, and as far as sexuality was concerned, we went very, very far. So that's kind of interesting to me, because in Pierre LeFou, and in the same within the Mood for Love, sex isn't explicitly shown,
Mhm.
and it's a strange choice because in the beginning of the film in Pierre LeFou, there's a scene where a woman is topless, and it's such an interesting artistic choice to have that be in a normal casual conversation as opposed to the scene in which the two main characters do actually have sex. It's not shown. I think he says something like, or Ferdinand says something to Marianne. I think your I think your breasts and thighs are very moving, and she responds with, "Pardon my French." She says, "Fuck me," and it's kind of this. It's really, really such an artistic choice to show that the scene is both explicit and hiding away. And it's kind of like what you said, Joss, about the dress. It's both conveying like a sexual relationship, but it's also not showing it. So it's really this weird relationship between the two films where they're both highly, highly sexual films, but sex is never shown.
Mhm.
And it's so, so interesting. What do you guys think about that?
Well, going back to what you were talking about with the article and like the whole liberation movement at the time, the scene in which the woman is topless is that scene at the beginning where he's at that party where they're just like listing off ads for some reason. And I kind of always like when I first saw that, I interpreted it as like this is like the French society pre like art, or not like pre-art, but like outside of this artistic movement. And then that's why like these women are so highly sexualized, and you can see like the men kind of gazing down at them while they're talking, and they're not really listening, they're just kind of but then as you see later, there's no sex outright, but it's very much more sexual and freeing with the way that they talk to each other and her outfit choices and her clothing.
And I feel like that's very representative of like the French attitude at the time. It's like very carefree, everything's going to the wind, which in contrast to China in the 60s, they were going through a cultural revolution. And In the Mood for Love is set right before that. So you kind of get that taste of hiding away and putting something away before actually being able to experience it. So like the movie was set in 1962, and I think the Cultural Revolution happened in like 1966. And so the film shows how China felt during that time, how constrained it felt before this revolution with, it's so claustrophobic in its setting, and the characters are so repressed in how they talk about sex that you can see the whole history of how China feels before the Cultural Revolution. You can feel that it's a society that looked down on sexual liberty, and it's very in opposition to Pierre LeFou, which I feel is very interesting.
Yeah, I feel like there's genuine debate as to whether or not the characters in the Mood for Love even had sex.
Yeah.
Like you could make a case that they never did, but you can also make a case that they did and that it's just not shown.
And each is equally plausible.
Yeah.
Kind of speaking to that artistic choice that you were speaking of, Justin,
Yeah.
and including that topless woman, kind of contrasting with the lack of nudity and sex in the rest of the film. I kind of also see it in a way of sort of conveying that there was this, like, almost, I don't want to say purposelessness nature of that liberation, because of course it wasn't purposelessness, but like in the Mood for Love, every action that the characters have with each other, there's a lot of purpose in it, and it speaks to, you know, their relationship with each other, how they converse with each other, how they look at each other, like, are they holding hands, are they not holding hands, whatever. But in the Mood for Love, it's kind of like it's there for the sake of it, you know, like almost like that topless lady was sort of just there for the sake of it. For why not? We live in this sexualized, liberated, not but sexually liberated society now. Why not just, you know, nudity for the sake of it? You know what I mean? Like that kind of ethos. That's all. I just kind of remembered that because I was thinking that when you said it, and I was like, "Oh yeah," but then I forgot it until now.
No, that's a really great point.
Really.
To what Gauss was saying about the whole idea of whether or not they had sex, I honestly don't think that in the end, like, it's the fact that they had sex or that they didn't that even matters. It's like the whole point about it is like their freedom to even have sex in the first place, and like the confinedness that they have within their space. And it just kind of like like the fact that you don't even know really like speaks to the subtleness of everything in the film. And I thought that it was cool how like in Pierre Le Fou, like they're very obvious with it, where it's like, oh fuck me, and then the next scene, you know, they're in the sand and they're toppled all over each other. Whereas and they have these crazy shots where it's like the fireworks and they have this crazy collage, compared to In the Mood for Love, it'll be like they just glance at each other and then suddenly there will be this moment of collage where it is also so subtle where you can barely even notice it unless you pay attention very closely. And I thought it was very interesting how the directors contrast in their use of collage with relation to the love. I don't know, does anybody have any other like questions or things that they wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
I mean, I could quickly add to the aspect of subtlety in the two films. Like in The Mood for Love, their actions are very subtle, but it's done in a way where we still take note of them. You know, they're not doing like crazy things. They're like, you know, saying hello, or like, you know, eating food at a table. You know, it's all very simple action, but we take note of every sort of detail that happens, and there's a lot of weight in the subtleties that the film carries. Whereas in Pierrot Le Fou, there are subtleties in like the details, but the actions of the characters, I think, are rarely, if ever, subtle. Like, they're committing violent acts, theft, murder, shooting guns, like it's all crazy stuff. There's no subtlety to anything. They're on the run from like gangsters. There's not much subtlety in that, but I think like that speaks to how it's two such different portrayals of love, and two different like versions of what love or romance can take, like what forms they can take.
I feel like that speaks to the nation that made the films, right? Because like you have this really subtle depiction of love where it's the scenes are mostly made up of just two people talking and getting food and walking with each other. And Pierre Le Fou is so spontaneous and impulsive, and you can tell that it's a French New Wave film because he's trying all these avant-garde ideas and approaches, and it challenges traditional storytelling in such a way that to compare it to the subtlety of In the Mood for Love is really interesting. There's nuances in both like paces of the film, but I feel like they kind of like respectively represent each of their films like time period very well, and like the ethos surrounding that time period.
Yeah, exactly. And like never mind, my bad. I just drew a blank.
Good.
Continue.
Okay. Do we want to wrap up, or do we
I
have
think
more
we
to say?
can.
All right.
Does anybody have anything else they want to say before?
Kind of a very random question. So
What's your very random?
Yeah, let's hear it.
I don't
What's
know.
your-
I just was wondering if in Pierre Le Fou anybody had anything to say about the significance of Vietnam within the story, because it does touch on it a lot.
Yeah, that was weird.
It
Yeah.
was that sequence of scenes was weird.
Yeah. And so I was trying to think of like why they touch on it so much when it's so like detached from Vietnam at all. And I thought like maybe the men that are after them are representative of the US, while Marianne and Nand are representative of like Vietnamese people who are like running away from this world but are still being chased.
I think it's a very like anti Vietnam War movie. I mean, like
Yeah.
there's that scene where they're in that room with the Marianne's like lover, and they kill him, and there's a bunch of what I noticed like Vietnam War era like and kind of World War II era like guns all over the place, and it looked like like a shipment of guns, and I feel like a lot of the violence in the movie is kind of condemning um, what was currently going on in Vietnam at the time. And I feel like the movie is it's written like an essay, so I feel like a lot of that essay, the subtext is kind of condemning what it felt like American values in how it responded to Vietnam, like with all the guns. Like that's not something you see in like a European film a lot. Like just an array of weaponry and they were all like American looking, and that's kind of like an American stereotype, whatever. And yeah, it feels like like a condemnation of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just like short. I feel like there was a lot of poking fun, in a way, at like just America and Americans in general in Pierrot. Like just like the way that Ferdinand acted when he was kind of like role playing as an American, and
Yeah,
the accent that he put on, it was like it was like kind of ridiculous in a way that it was like so like poking fun at America. I don't know.
and that's like the French New Wave.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
the whole purpose of the French New Wave is to like poke fun at like Hollywood ideals and kind of say, hey, this is stupid, right? Let's do this other thing.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's really saying the same about the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They kind of like kill two birds with one stone in that one, but
Yeah.
but if that's all we want to talk about,
If that's all we want to talk about.
That's all we want to talk about.
Yeah.
I feel like if we added E2 Mama Tambien to this conversation,
Oh,
Like,
wild.
it
Yeah.
would change so
like
much.
3 hours.
You have no sex, and then all sex.
Oh,
Just sex.
Yeah, that would
Just
be
sex.
just sex. Nothing else.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
I smell.
I snow. That was kind of scary.
I was
Yeah,
horrible.
There was a point earlier where it was glitching so much, and on your screen, Julia, Evan came up and then was gone
Yeah.
because it just glitched.
No, on my screen, Evan came up and they were just there, like against the door.
Yeah.
So, like,
I didn't even notice that they were there, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty quick appearance.
All right. Are we good? We should have like a little.
Wrap up.
Have like
Yeah.
a intro or anything.
Okay. All right, so this was like a really meaningful discussion, guys. I feel like we touched on a lot of the intertextuality between these two films.
Yeah.
Very much so.
So yeah, so thank you guys so much, Eliot, Jocelyn, Julia. Thank you
Yeah, thank
so
you.
much. This was a
Thank
wonderful
you.
discussion. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.